Can.
Welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. I know it's election day, so everyone has much on their mind. But it is an interesting moment and a great day to start thinking about potential for postgraduate career options and thinking about postgraduate career options in a global setting. My name is Annie Gibson. I am the Director of Study Abroad at Tulane, and we have a group of panelists today that are going to discuss a little bit about their own path and trajectory into international and global careers. And then much of this time will be left up open for questions that you all may have. So you can feel free to type your questions in the chat, and we will pose it to ourselves and those of us on the panel. We also have some representatives from the Career Center who can give some overall advice about how to prepare cover letters, how to do job searches when you start looking for international careers, because it can be a bit different in that sense. So with that, I am excited to have you all here, and I'm going to go through our panelists one at a time for their introductions, and then we will look forward to your questions. So I will first introduce Julia Lang. If you could introduce yourself and spend 5 minutes or so thinking about what it was like for you to transition into a career abroad, and any advice you have for people right now that are thinking about global careers.
Hello, good morning. Thanks, Annie. So let's see. I graduated from Cornell University in 2008 and I'd spent some time traveling as a student. I studied abroad in Ecuador. I really wanted to get back abroad and was not really interested in going straight into a more traditional career office job like a lot of the people I knew were doing. And so I basically just started researching what was possible, how could I get back abroad, and found that there were a wide variety of international study, or not study abroad, but travel organizations for high school students that were looking for leaders for the summer, for summer experiences. And so 3 days after graduation, I had my first job in Costa Rica, an organization called Rustic Pathways, where I was with a group of about 15 young people, and we were with them for 2 weeks at a time. And I ended up working there all summer, having multiple different cohorts of students. And then that really led to working for these international travel organizations for about a decade. So I've worked for National Geographic student expeditions, Experiment International Living, Carpe Diem Education. There's a lot of these organizations that are constantly looking for leaders. And so what I really loved about it was short term. I got to work with other young American students and aid in their development and transformation and language learning skills, and really help them become travelers as well, where you're teaching a lot of those lifelong skills of how do you find a hostel, how do you book transportation in another country. And I also got to travel all over the world in doing it. So I've led trips in Vietnam, in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Guatemala, in just really all over the world. So I did compile a list of organizations that this is just it's not a incredibly comprehensive list, but it's a great list to start with that I'll drop in the chat right now. Organizations in black are just ones that I found. Organizations in red are those that I personally have worked for. So this is just to give you a brief idea of all the different organizations that you could consider working for. This is obviously a very different time in the world than when I graduated in 2008. And so I don't want to take up more time now, but in terms of the larger career development perspective, I'm happy to talk more about that. I know there's also some career educators on the panel, so maybe we can wait and talk about that later in terms of how your strategy might be different, or how given COVID and just given everything that's happening in our country and our world, it is a different landscape than in 2008. But thanks so much for inviting me, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you, Julia. I think the as Julia mentioned, this kind of transition to a global career is where you're testing it out. You're doing short term. Has been something that has been, we've seen many students decide to kind of go this route. It's a great way to create networks and things like that. And as Julia mentioned, right now, the field of international education and what this looks like, it's a different strategy with COVID and what's available. And so myself and Julia are happy to answer questions about that when we get to the Q&A period. So let's move on to our next panelist, Praveena Fernes. Could you talk a little bit about your experience in transition? And Praveena has a little bit of experience navigating this world right now, this post-pandemic world and uncertainties. So Praveena, we look forward to your intro.
Yeah. I think I moved 4 times during the pandemic, so to different countries. Not because I wanted to, but anyway. So it's been a bit chaotic to be. Now I'm calling from London, but my journey starts probably at Tulane, where I started, I think, studying abroad in 2017 in Northeast Thailand. I ended up working for the Study Abroad Center for Annie, and had a lot of really cool experiences, honestly, after coming back to the US and thinking about what it was like to be an American abroad and trying to sort of share my experiences and learn from other of my peer experiences. So I think it was only after that experience I started to really think about, okay, like generally in the next 5 years, maybe not right after graduation, but eventually I want to like have even more of these experiences because they were just very personally satisfying for me. So I ended up first taking a job in DC with the help of actually Catherine, who's on this call. She helped me get my first job out of college, and I worked for a healthcare research and policy sort of consulting firm, and looked at like US and other healthcare systems all over the world, mostly the West. I didn't really love that job, to be honest, and made a very big pivot and applied for a Fulbright in rural Northeast Thailand, which connected a lot of my interests from studying abroad, the same types of communities I had been initially connected to in 2017. And also I ended up using the same tool I used for my undergraduate thesis, a citizen science tool. So it was a really nice like marriage of experiences, but also definitely a playground for me in that I was able to try out a few new things. So I looked at object-based storytelling in addition to sort of the citizen science research I was doing on a dam affected community. And then actually, I have everyone here on this panel, I'm like, I have to thank for all my good experiences. So you're in good hands. Dr. Beers actually really helped me get the Fulbright. And then at the nth hour, a little bit was like, oh, you should apply for a Marshall Scholarship. You can go to school for free in the UK. And I realized I didn't have to take the GRE. So I sort of spent a lot of time on essays, which I'd much rather do than study for a standardized test. And now I'm actually, I think, connecting a lot of my pivots and my different interests at SOAS, where I'm studying political ecology. And next year, I plan to take on a degree at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine and bring back my public health roots. So yeah, I think there are lots of ways to have a lot of fun, keep learning new things, and take a non-linear path, which was exciting for me.
Thanks, Praveena. Yeah, a lot of great information and a wealth of information, and thinking about how to navigate the emotions of all of these shifts and pivots, and then also what it's like to do a higher ed degree outside the United States. So if some of you are considering that and thinking about that, Praveena has a wealth of knowledge that she can share about, how that, both in the application part of that phase, but then also day-to-day life as a graduate student in the UK. What does that look like? Okay, next, if we could have Lipaz Avigal, please. And Lipaz, we're seeing your video sideways. I don't know if there's a way to shift.
Sorry, I had some technological issues. Is this better?
That's better. Thank you.
Perfect. Okay, I'll talk a little bit about my transition. I think for me, the story is a little bit different. I actually grew up outside of the US, which kind of was a big like marker for me to know that I want to, maybe work outside of the US or spend some time like traveling between different places. One of the biggest and most like marking experiences, I think, at Tulane specifically, to send me on this trajectory is spending my semester abroad in Argentina, learning from different types of professors and about different types of cultures, and knowing I really want to explore that as soon as I am graduating. I also, oh, can you hear me? Sorry, I'm on my phone, which is horribly, am I back?
You're back, yes.
I also knew when I finished university that I wasn't interested in getting into a full-time job or having some sort of a routine. I went on a fellowship in Israel that is actually quite similar to Fulbright in a lot of ways, although it's based in a cohort experience. I spent the last year here, and of course, Corona threw lots of things like off track, but I decided to stick in Israel and to stay here. And, a lot of things changed. I was bartending for a while, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of instability. But right now I am working for a tech company called Wix here in Tel Aviv. So yeah, that's a little bit about where I am and what's going on.
Thanks, Lipaz. And what would you say was how did you make that transition into Wix? Like what was it, all luck? Was it networking? How did that happen for you?
I don't really know how a lot of things happened during this period of time. It's really quite odd. There was, from the fellowship that I was on, I knew a person who was working at the company. And I'm interested in writing and content writing in particular, which is kind of a role that opened up. And I applied and went through the process. It can be quite a difficult like interview process, but there's so many resources, like even back at Tulane, which I now like retroactively, I wish I had gone back and used. But there's so many resources to like know how to do these types of interviews. And, a lot of it, because it's an international company, a lot of the interviews are happening in English, which can be, which can like be helpful in the situation. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah. And that nonlinear path is often something that, we see a lot with students at the beginning, and it can be frustrating not knowing where you're going and what you're going to do and how long things last. So I think your story is really, really important to
part of the fun also.
Yeah, that's the right attitude. So now also I'd like to just take a moment. We have a career services staff here online as well. And so if you all, we don't, maybe not one by one, but maybe if one person wants to give a little summary of things that students should consider and think about when they're starting a job search internationally, when they're thinking about their cover letters, when they're thinking about their resumes. Do you guys have some tips that you would give overall as a starting point? And then you all can just play off each other for a bit, and then we'll open it up to questions.
I'll start. I don't mind starting. So one thing I like to remind students is that, every country has its own cultural nuances with regards to professionalism and documents and customs, or different, just things that you might not consider, like a picture on a resume, right? That's always my best example of, in the US, it would be really weird to send a resume with your photo on it, like your passport photo. In other countries or cultures, that's standard. That's what you should expect to do. So I like to just research, right? If you can't research something enough, just research it more and figure out that you are just kind of playing by the right rules in terms of where you're applying and what's expected of you. The other thing to consider, though, especially like Lipaz mentioned, is that with international companies that are global in nature, that have headquarters or offices all over the world, do your Googling work and making sure that is there some information on Glassdoor or other kind of sites or sources that might tell you how to approach it if they don't give that to you already. I'll stop there and let Catherine or Abby speak, and then if Jennifer wants to speak about your unique role at Tulane.
Do you want to go, Abby? I'll just kind of play off that as well. Also thinking about like a lot of American companies want a resume, they want a shorter kind of version of your work history, and not so much always international companies. So that would, again, what Catherine's saying, kind of research that. More international companies might want that longer version and more of a CV style approach to your past experiences. So things to kind of, again, it's country to country specific, and kind of research that a little bit.
I would just add to like have conversations with people. I think obviously coming to this panel is a great first step because you're getting to hear experiences of people who have been through the process, especially if you have some ideal sort of like geographical locations that you'd like to be after graduation. It's likely that we have Tulane alumni there already. And so using things like LinkedIn or Tulane Connect to reach out to folks who have been in your shoes and who have made it to the other side. And of course, you know, if you don't know where to start with that, reach out to us and have an appointment and we can walk you through that process.
Wonderful. Yeah, I can't speak enough about the importance of using that alumni network, and it's an underutilized resource that we have at Tulane. So, you know, our international network is very large at Tulane. Speaking with career services, speaking with your alumni association is something that is really helpful, and also re-emphasizing what this group has talked about in terms of the cultural implications of writing a resume and writing a cover letter in different countries. You know, students are often surprised. In certain countries, you might have to put a headshot on your cover letter, and that is something that, you know, we wouldn't do in the United States. But, you know, there can be these differences to, you know, how long that they should be. So really doing thinking about the resume, thinking about the cover letter as a cultural document as part of your learning process is so important. And so finally, our final panelist, before we open it up to questions, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Beers. And when we're thinking about, you know, creating these important documents, Jennifer is going to talk to us more about these nationally competitive scholarships where essays, presentation of your work is so very important. So Jennifer.
Thanks, Annie. Thanks for having me here today. And I'm so excited to see not only my colleagues who I haven't seen in person in so long, but also Praveena and Lipaz, with whom I worked on a number of various awards. So they can kind of fill out or contextualize what the experience is like from their perspective, from an applicant perspective. But so I'm the coordinator for competitive scholarships at Tulane. It's a mouthful and it's hard title to fit on my business card, but basically in my role, I work with students, undergraduates, graduates, and alumni. So even, you know, 2 years from now, if you're thinking back and like, you know, maybe I'm interested in Fulbright, I have alum, you know, reach back out to me and work every year on various awards. But in any case, these nationally competitive scholarships are awards offered by government agencies or bureaus, independent philanthropic organizations, foundations, organizations that all have some sort of work that they're trying to accomplish. And if you are doing work that aligns with their mission or goals, there's funding to send you, you know, for to support graduate school or to send you abroad to work and do various things in various capacities. For example, Praveena was awarded a Fulbright grant to conduct research in Thailand. The Fulbright program is very well subscribed by Tulane students, undergraduates, graduates, and alumni. And the Fulbright program essentially is set up to serve as the U.S. government's, the State Department's premier citizen ambassador program. They want to send you out into this world to serve, to teach other cultures about American life and culture and the diversity of it, and also to sort of absorb and understand and learn more about the cultures you find yourself in. And so there's a few different paths that Fulbright's identified as a means to do that. You can serve as an English teaching assistant, you can conduct independent research like Praveena did, or you can pursue one-year master's programs in various places. So whether it's academic, whether it's more experiential or professional or research-oriented, Fulbright's a fantastic program to help you kind of take that first step to explore international options that could be a great springboard to international careers post-Fulbright. There's other awards, for example, that support graduate study. Praveena, as a Marshall Scholar, is studying in the UK. And I think she downplayed the significance of it a little bit. The Marshall Scholarship is an extremely prestigious award, and we're thrilled Praveena is in the UK now with the support of that scholarship. The Rhodes Scholarship, which most folks have heard of when we talk about competitive scholarships, will fund graduate study at Oxford. There's programs like Princeton in Latin America and Princeton in Africa, Princeton in Asia that will offer you the opportunity to have more kind of professional experiences, working oftentimes in different development capacities or teaching English. So there's a number of awards. Without going through each one and taking up all our time there, I'm going to go ahead and post a link to a list that's by no means exhaustive, but is a good place to start if you want to start thinking about or considering competitive scholarship opportunities that can help you get out of the US and get out into the world.
Thank you. So that brings us to this next part, which I think is really the most beneficial moment of this panel, which was where we really get into the nitty-gritty of your questions. So we want to meet you where you are in terms of your thinking about an international career. Or transition to a job post-graduation. So in the chat, please post questions that you have, and no question is insignificant. It's a complicated time right now, and thinking about how to make those transitions is important. So what's on your mind right now? Where do you feel stuck? Where do you feel that you could use some advice about how to get this started? So please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A. While I'm waiting for those questions to pop up, I'll just talk a little bit from the perspective of the Center for Global Education, where we're dealing with a lot of restrictions on travel and changes in the ways in which we kind of navigate the world. One of the things that is potentially a silver lining of this moment of the pandemic in terms of connecting globally is that internship opportunities, virtual internship opportunities, are really popping up left and right. And virtual internships opportunities with companies internationally. We have seen examples where students have found these internships that then later become something more long-term and in person. And so while during your spring of senior year, you couldn't normally do an internship in the UK, now those options might exist for you. So that's something to think about. If right now, if you want to start looking for short-term internship options abroad that might later lead into something, to create a network, which is sort of what Lipaz was talking about a little bit without that virtual piece, but ways in which you start networking that the pandemic has allowed these kind of global networks to begin. So what questions do you guys have?
I'll pose one to Lipaz and Praveena while we wait on, okay, well, here comes one. I'll let that one, Annie, I'll let you ask those two, and then I have one if we have more time.
Awesome. So thinking about navigating visas and other systems is a question. So of you panelists, how have you navigated your visa situations?
I feel like Praveena should answer this one because my situation, I have citizenship, so it doesn't really apply.
For me, in both scenarios, living in Thailand and then living in London during the pandemic, I came through a program. So they sort of held my hand in those ways and gave me the sort of directions pretty to the T. I'm on a tier 4 visa. I don't know if that means anything to anyone in the UK, which means, there's one type of visa where you can't work, and there are other types of visas where you're a student and you can work part-time, which is like the one I'm on. So I think the other resource to use, I remember when I was studying abroad, is actually like the Center for Global Education, like Annie Center, has really, really in-depth resources, and actually they helped me even like put the stamp on my passport and like send it off. So I think definitely take advantage of that resource. I don't know if you want to speak more to that.
Sure, I'll speak more about. Julia, can you talk a little bit about how you did the visa, and then I'll wrap it up, or the other way around the visa issue.
I'm trying to remember. I don't want to give the wrong information, but I'm pretty sure what I did was research ahead of time which ones you had to get ahead of time and which ones you could just get on the spot. Because at least when I was traveling, there were a lot of places where you would just go, and at customs you would pay the amount of money that the visa costs and you would just get it. Is that still the case? I don't want to give wrong information, but I'm pretty sure that's what I did in a lot of countries I traveled in.
Yeah. So I think, when you guys are thinking about careers abroad, their visas is definitely an issue, and work permits are definitely an issue, whether or not, whether the job that you're doing, you need a particular visa to go on, whether it's an education visa, whether it's a work permit visa. And then some jobs that may be short term, you might just be going on a normal tourist visa. And so in examples where you're working, for example, in education abroad, so for example, leading high school groups, which is the option of what Julia was doing. Oftentimes you're doing short term. So you're just traveling, you're there for a few weeks, maybe a few months. In general, if you're there under 90 days, you can likely just travel on a tourist visa, with the stipulation if you're working for depending on the company. So in the case of if you get a job working in one of the providers that Julia mentions in the list that you see in the chat, likely you're employed through the US. You'll be going abroad for a short period of time, so you can probably just travel on a tourist visa, and the company that you're working for will help you out. When you start searching for jobs internationally, so you're sending your cover letter to an international company and potentially getting hired by that company, that's more of a commitment of the organization, that they'll be sponsoring you for a work permit potentially. And there are country by country different regulations about that. And corporation by corporation, depending on the size, they may know or not know much about the process. And so it's often up to you to do your due diligence, to research what it would be like to get a work permit. Your company might be okay sponsoring you for that, but they might not know how to go about doing it. So again, you can consult the embassy sites to learn a little bit about that. And then I think also, testing the waters. So, there are certain places where you can't without that work permit, you're not allowed to work in country. So making sure that those rules and regulations. These internships that I'm talking about, whether they're virtual or whether they're in person, those companies can kind of help. They have processes in place that as Praveena was mentioning, that can kind of, they help you decide, which kind of visa that you're applying to. We had a student that spoke a bit last year on this panel who was talking about how he had worked in Brazil, and his transition he went to Brazil to live for as long as he could. He went on a tourist visa where he can be there 3 months, and then had to leave the country and come back. And so to renew that tourist visa, and he did that for I can't remember, 6 months to a year, going and coming back, and had started building a relationship with a particular company who ultimately sponsored him for his visa. So that's a trajectory that some may take. And yeah, so those are, the visa issue is definitely challenging, and do your research. The consulate and embassy sites give you a bit of an in into knowing about work permits or not. And also that there's this flexibility. There are both these programs that you can go through, whether it's, one of these scholarships like Jennifer Beers announced that would help you, whether it's an organization that is helping, or if you're just, finding a company on your own. Each one has kind of a different way that you would navigate the visa.
I would just add to that list that Dr. Beers was talking about with, there's some that are more scholarships for schools, but there are some programs like, for instance, Princeton in Asia, Princeton in Africa, that just ultimately serve as a job placement organization. And I think the pro to going down that route, to kind of segue into Reagan's question, is that's sort of the package that you want. It's the working around the visa. Because I think for Princeton in Asia, I know some of my really close friends from Thailand were scholars in that cohort. They ultimately actually had to pay Princeton in Asia, Dr. Beers, you can correct me if I'm wrong, $500 US to help them for those types of fees. But they've really found it was worthwhile, and kind of considered it more of a job placement organization with a built-in cohort, rather than something like a Marshall scholarship where you're gonna go to school. So there's sort of a variation there.
And I can read Reagan's question out loud if any of the other panelists have some insights. But Reagan asked, I've heard about programs that kind of set you up in an abroad job, typically teaching English, either government subsidized or an org like CIEE. Would you recommend these more setup programs over an independent job search? What are the pros and cons? And Reagan is specifically interested in Latin America.
I'll start and talk a little bit about that. These companies that kind of curate experience, that facilitate teaching English, that facilitate CIEE, that has internship experiences, they're great options because they are a way to start creating your network with a structure already. And so I've had a few students, for example, do the English teaching assistantship through CIEE in different places. Chile, for example, is a student that's coming to my mind, and you're teaching English within a local university. And from that, it ended up parlaying into a long-term job for that student, because then they were on the ground, were able to start creating the network, had learned a bit about the visa process. So the JET program in Japan, there's a lot of options. So I think that they are great options. What are the downsides? The downsides are that sometimes some of these have fees that you're paying to do this. So thinking about, financially, does it financially make sense for you? There's often scholarships, and even and through Tulane, there may be potential for some money that you could apply to for some of this. I'm not sure, applying to these alumni experiences, I'm not sure exactly how that works. It'll take a little research on your end, but I think, and then there are external funding options available as well. So there's not, the downside is just thinking logistically about the funding, if they are a for pay experience, but usually you get a stipend on the ground. So you might have a program fee, but you're living, it ends up being okay because you're getting a stipend and living expenses and creating your network. It's a good kind of jump off place. Anyone want to add?
Yeah, I just really want to highlight the importance of how the benefit of being on the ground prior to looking for a job. It can be like incredibly overwhelming to apply to all these different companies and be in the United States, and they don't know whether you're actually committed to the job or not, and whether you're gonna come or it's gonna be an issue. But once you're in the ground, once you have those connections, and once you have the security of like presence, I think it's a lot easier to begin the process from there. So I think whatever gets you to the place where you want to work, where you want to live, where you want to do what you want to do, is a good beginning. I know that for my fellowship, it was a lot easier for me to move to Tel Aviv once, with something that gave me a little bit of structure. And from there, after a year of knowing what I was doing, I was much more able to handle 4 months of instability or 4 months of search. It creates some sort of, you have a life prior to looking. And I think that that's important.
I agree with both those. And just the one thing I would add is for a lot of organizations, they want to know, especially for the student travel organizations, and I assume for others, if you're applying to work abroad, they want to know that you have lived abroad or that you have some sort of experience abroad. And so earlier in the chat, I posted that Tulane awards around $500,000 to students every single year that you can apply for. So for instance, at the Taylor Center, we have a $1,500 award. It's called the Changemaker Catalyst Award can fund anything, a conference, if you want to go learn about another organization or another country or a research project. And that's just one of many different funding options available. So if you're proactive and you want to work abroad after graduation, but you haven't ever been abroad, then you can strategically start gaining those experiences. And you also then have an award on your resume, right? So there's ways that you can proactively gain those experiences. So then you have experience abroad in certain countries that you want to work for in the future.
I would also just add to that. I feel like it's almost like a safer space to be applying for things within Tulane, because you're extra supported, and you have some resources to actually get even further eyes on your application. So if you're able to, even as practice, apply for a small award or a scholarship or some sort of recognition. I've actually used those writing applications for external applications like the Fulbright and the Marshall. So I think ultimately it's you end up building on your application and learning how to tell your story. And I think the more you do it, the better you'll be at it. So can't hurt to apply for funding within Tulane.
Those of you on the line that are younger or that are earlier in your undergraduate career too, I think the more that you are thinking about this and the earlier, the better. When we always talk to students who are about to study abroad, a lot happens. A semester goes by really, really fast. And you may not be thinking about, the networks and the connections that you're making while you're abroad, but you go on a study abroad and you meet with an organization that you really like on one of your co-curricular activities. Take advantage of that, reach out, be proactive about the people that are working in that organization. Those networks can continue for longer. So think about that proactively in these moments where you're working. And so we're talking about them now in terms of if you're about to take a virtual internship or looking for virtual internships in this moment where mobility is paused a little bit, past things that you've done if some of you do have international experience, think about those networks, think about your alumni networks and things like that.
To follow up on that point, it's never too early, and actually I encourage students to come chat with me earlier on to know what competitive scholarship opportunities are out there. especially the ones that can take you abroad, so that when you do study abroad, you can be really intentional about the sorts of things that you choose to do. For example, if you learn about the Fulbright English Teaching Assistantship Program that you'll apply for, for the year after you graduate, before you figure out what the next steps are, maybe taking an opportunity that might present itself to teach English to a middle school student while you're abroad in Madrid. Things like that can increase the competitiveness of your application. So just kind of piggybacking on that, if you're interested in learning more about these awards that are out there, just to get them on your radar, to be informed as you're making choices as you go forward, whether it's opportunities that present themselves when you're studying abroad, or pursuing opportunities on campus or externally. It's kind of good to know the lay of the land, even if it seems very far off to be thinking about, oh, what am I going to do the year after I graduate? It'll creep up sooner than you know. And so the more you know about opportunities that are out there that could be a good fit for you, the better position you're in to make decisions about and choices over the next few years.
It looks like we have a couple more questions that came through the chat in the Q&A. Meredith asked in the chat, any advice around working across cultures? So I guess more of that cultural competency piece.
I think that if you have, especially if there's a location that you're like thinking about, or like imagining some sort of career or future in, it's really important to be intentional about having some proficiency in the language. That will, like, even if you know, like cultural language, you learn on the spot, but having the ability to communicate on a regular basis with your coworkers and people on the street is going to serve you in ways that I can't emphasize enough. I think, in terms of like working in an international company with lots of different people, I think that level of like cultural isolation that one might feel in a company that's, distinctly, Spanish or distinctly whatever, might be a little bit different. Like, Wix is incredibly international. There are people from all over the world, and I think that makes the experience just a little bit different. But still, I would say language is like the number one thing you can do to help yourself to integrate into the country in the most seamless way.
A few things I would add to that. I found it to be really important to learn a little bit about the history of that country and the United States before entering that country. So for instance, when I was leading students in Vietnam, right, when we would encounter someone, when we encounter Vietnamese folks, just for me to know a little bit about the history, and same with Cambodia, really same with any other country, that when people meet you as an American, they're not just meeting you, but they have all these different preconceived notions about who you are and what you might be wanting from them. And just to have the humility to really learn a little bit about your own history. And something else I found really helpful is just to do some research and learn a little bit about different modes of communication. Some cultures are really direct. Some cultures are really not direct, that you'll ask a question and they'll say, no, no, no. But that actually means yes, or vice versa. And so learning about that. And then I've also really messed up, and you're going to mess up no matter what. And to know that that's probably going to happen, but there was ways that you can learn ahead of time. So for instance, I was working in Thailand with a group of students, and I happened to be teaching some yoga, and I was doing it with my host family. And I didn't learn until after that, like, touching a Thai person's head is super taboo, that is the connection. They often feel that that's the connection to God. And, me trying to be helpful, doing a Shavasana adjustment, and then realize that I had made this really big cultural snafu. And so that was something that I could have done my own research ahead of time to learn more about that. So talk to people, but also you can learn a lot of this by just researching online about different cultural, just about different cultures, and know that you're going to mess up, but also know that you can be proactive and learn before you go.
Julia highlights, I think, two really important parts of the learning that happen when you decide to work in an international and intercultural setting. There's both this culture specific knowledge that you need to build for yourself. So learning about the connection between the U.S. and host cultures, plural, so understanding, right, your own cultural baggage that you carry and those communities that you're visiting. So that's, very specific to location. And Lipaz talked about it as, you learn some of it on site, and you're going to make some cultural snafus because it's the learning process. So having that humility and working through. And then this other piece of knowledge building that should happen as you work across cultures are learning some of those, we call it cultural general knowledge. So what are these things across cultures that might be different, that we might expect, if a meeting's at 3 p.m. in certain cultures, it will be at 3 p.m. And in others, maybe there's more of a flexibility around that, or the directness of the way that you communicate. Hierarchies, how power hierarchies are established. So, if you, go online and look at examples of, navigating intercultural communication, learning a bit about these cultural general frameworks, the things that might be really different across cultures is helpful. But then really, it's only helpful when you apply it in the specific location, right? So you don't want to go into stereotyping that all people here will be like this, right? But finding that balance within yourself is so important.
Annie, it looks like we have one more question in the Q&A, and this might be more for Career Center folks too. It's about timing of application. So when should students begin applying for jobs? This student in particular is looking for a job this summer.
Catherine, I don't mind starting. So I think the kind of most important thing is that if you are looking at some of these programs or scholarships or awards, that you're very aware of the deadlines. And for any internal programs like the ones that Jennifer's department runs, that there are 2-lane deadlines before the maybe national or otherwise deadline. Otherwise, if you're looking for something, start now. I mean, it's never too early to start building up your list of organizations or programs, or just narrowing down maybe generally what regions of the world you're interested in, and starting to develop more information for yourself about what you're interested in applying to, starting to connect with people in your network now. And then when you do see something, whether it's an internship that's virtual for the spring, that you can start to kind of make those connections even more, or a position that becomes available for a June or July start, you've made connections, you feel pretty comfortable with what's expected of you and vice versa, and you're ready to apply. So the timeline is going to be kind of different depending on what you're looking for, and if it's a structured program, and also probably the country you're looking in and what types of industries. So that's a very it depends answer, but it's never too early to start getting yourself organized and ready.
And this might sound a little strange, but sometimes the best time to begin contacting organizations is actually when there's not a job posting, meaning that if there's an organization that really interests you, if they actually have a job posting, you can't really contact them because they're only want to talk to people who have gone through the interview process. But if they don't have a posting and you take the initiative to reach out and set up an informational call with them and build a relationship, then when a job posting does become available, you are already on their radar, you're already part of that network. And so a lot of folks here have said, talk to people, begin to have those conversations. That's actually the way that I got my foot in the door with those international student organizations, was when there wasn't even a job posting available. I was doing this research. I reached out to someone that worked at the organization just because I was really curious and wanted to learn more and thought it sounded super exciting. We had an hour-long chat, and then fast forward a few months later, I did apply for the job and sent that person an email saying, on reconnecting. It was so great to talk to you several months ago. Just so you know, I did submit an application. And I think it was part of the reason that I got the job is because I already had built that personal relationship.
I would just add, like, if you do go about it that way, which I think is the smart way, you're also able to, and I think in all interviews, if you kind of pump yourself up with like, I'm not just interviewing for the job, like that you're interviewing them to see if like they're a good fit for you. So I think like you're able to better assess if the organization, because like you're a qualified Tulane student that like is awesome. Like I know the job market during COVID feels weird, but like I think we're gonna have so many issues in the world. And when there are issues in the world, there are always jobs. So I think being confident, which is really hard to do as like coming out of undergrad, that you can create a world of options in your mind, and just thinking, I don't know, it helps me to think like I'm interviewing them too. So that sort of informal process that Julia outlined gives you more time and flexibility to do that.
And as you're reaching out and networking, that there's stages, right? First, you're kind of dropping a line. You're tapping into your different networks. So you're shooting an email to your professor that you think might have an interesting email, or you're reaching out to one of us on the panel that you've heard today to say, you know, how I'm interested. What should I do next? So that's that first drop, and then you're going to hear some things like you've heard today. You've heard some things. You've gotten some lists. So then the next part of the research is really on you. That nothing is going to be handed to you on a silver platter. So from there, it's thinking about what do I need to do to show initiative and to move this forward. So it might be rewriting your cover letter and resume to then send out. It might be, you know, that you're spending a few hours really researching these companies. I love, Julia has a great story about her and her roommate researching these companies. Would you tell that story again, Julia, of how you just decided, okay, I'm going to get an international job, and how you made it happen?
Yeah, so when I was in college, I mentioned this earlier, that everyone around us was kind of going into the very traditional fields, and I did not want to do that. And my best friend in college and I decided we just wanted to see what was possible and what was out there. And we just went on Google and started researching as student study abroad, travel, work abroad, just anything that we could. And I think this is what you're referring to, Annie. And so it really was just typing into Google, like, what is possible, that we didn't even know that student travel organizations existed, but we were curious to find out what might be possible. And then it was just applying to many, many different organizations. And you would talk to some person or have one interview, and then that conversation is always, okay, who else should I be talking to, or what other organizations exist? And one thing led to another. And so while we both were doing this research, we ended up working for separate organizations. We didn't see each other for 3 months, even though we both were in Costa Rica. And then that led to us both working for about a dozen other companies. And so you don't know what you don't know. But if you go into it with a sense of curiosity, then at least for us, that really helped. And if you do right by one organization, right, that opened doors to many other organizations as well.
Annie, I did get a couple last minute quick questions. The first is how to connect with panelists. So maybe panelists, if you guys want to drop your emails in the chat, if you're open to having extended conversations. And then the second, I know Lipaz mentioned getting on ground first and getting acclimated. So the question is it safe to be like a nanny or an au pair abroad as a way to get acclimated? I don't know if any panelists have done that.
I have not been an au pair abroad, but I know many people that have, and so you should go through one of the reputable companies. there are also, you know, listings that you can find more informally, you know, on Craigslist and things like that. And those obviously you need to do your due diligence on the person and things like that. But au pair companies are a real thing. Oftentimes they're interested in, you know, the language aspect. And I would say what has been important for friends that have done au pair is to really talk with the family about expectations, timing of when you will be working, when you will be off, and see if it's a good fit for you. You know, some families are very, you know, you can set a very structured time because they want you at certain periods, where others want you to be more flexible, and it would be hard for you to know your schedule a week to week. You're required to give a schedule week to week, but it can change. And so the friends that I know who have done this, it's been a way for them to really up their language. And so they want to be in country to really work on their language, to then transition and to create that network. So the au pair was this jumping block to getting in country where they wanted to be, and then widening their network.
I think those are all the questions that we had.
So thank you all for joining us again. Connect with anyone on this panel. This is a great time to think about global careers. It's also, we're in this time of we don't really have all of the answers. Things are being rewritten for us right now. And so that's both, you know, I know causes anxiety, but there are potential silver linings in that. There's ways that you can think outside the box. There's ways that, you know, blurred lines of how things used to be done might be happening differently. So keeping your foot and finger on the pulse of that is important to kind of stay engaged, because international engagement opportunities, there's great demand for it. Though we're living this pandemic, this isn't a moment of shutting down in that sense, but it is a moment of rethinking how we navigate being together. So thank you all for being here. I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining. These are such great perspectives. And I hope you all have a great election day.
Thank you, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. Good to see you all.
Thank you.
Bye. Okay. I must have gotten on